when I'm interacting with cannabis, I don't try to solve it, right? Because it's so easy to get myself caught into trying to solve the problem with the same level of thinking that created it, that when I'm interacting with cannabis, I'm meant to feel it, right? And it's uncomfortable sometimes. Sometimes it's amazing. Sometimes I'm blissed out like unbelievably, but also other times it's challenging. And so I'll move through that, and then I'll maybe journal a couple of things. I'll breathe. I'll meditate sometimes if it gets really uncomfortable. I just kind of want to be on standby mode. And then afterwards, then I'll go with my masculine and actually start trying to put things together and problem solve it and, build the puzzle. And I find that being able to dance between my feminine and masculine allows both aspects to work at what they do best, instead of having my masculine do both or my feminine do both, when in reality that very rarely works.
Hello and welcome to the Building Men podcast. Become the strongest version of yourself mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and physically. What's up, brother?
I feel like it's been a little bit.
It's been a minute. I was talking to Mike today. This is the first time we've been in studio since like August 6th or August 7th. Yeah. It's a month.
I missed it. I miss our time together.
Yeah, and you're so far away. Why are you so far away from me right now?
I was sitting on your lap before we started, and you said that was a little too much.
Too much.
That's fine.
I'll
move over.
I appreciated your hand on my inner thigh as we were talking initially. So yeah, we'll be in the studio for the next 2 days, and it's like 4 or 5 guests each day. Mm-hmm. So we'll get back into the swing of things. The audience doesn't know because we release an episode a week, but it's been a minute. So
yeah.
Riding a bike, getting back on a bike.
That's right.
So we have our guest today. His name is Ryan Sprague, and he is the host of the Highly Optimized podcast. He has a program for men called Connect with Cannabis, and he also does a podcast called This One Time On Psychedelics. So if I'm not mistaken, we're going to be speaking in some way, shape, or form about drugs today.
Absolutely.
I'm thinking that we'll go on that journey a little bit. So not something that's in our wheelhouse, so I'm sure we will learn something today as well. So I wanted to let me turn it over to the Zoom, introduce Ryan Sprague to the podcast. What's up, my man?
What is up, guys? Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to chat with you. And, you guys were chatting about being out of the studio for a month. You just got to start a second podcast, and I promise you'll never be able to be out of the studio that long.
Exactly. Yeah, that's
be living here.
True. Yeah. Yep. We were just talking on the way in. We're like, we haven't even had a podcast where it's just me and my brother in a while. We've had so many guests on. There's so much that we want to talk about, just shit that's happened in our own lives. Yeah.
Too many friends,
Too many friends, right?
Yeah, we're just too awesome.
So welcome aboard. We also, before you jumped in, we had a couple minutes to bullshit with you. There's so many people that are in our lives that have overlapped, and we've, this is the first time we've met today, but several guests that we both had on our specific podcasts, and a lot of them have come through the Enlifted program. That Enlifted Coaches program. And our journey started off, I think the first person I interviewed through that was Angelo Cisco, and he introduced me to Chase Tollis, and introduced me to Mark England, to Adam Chin, and then it just become this, familial type thing with all of us connecting. So how did you get involved with that to start with? I'm just curious, with the Enlifted program, how did you get involved with that program?
Yeah, well, this perfectly goes into my own personal hero's journey, right? And so to speed it up a little bit, because I could drag it out, but to speed it up a little bit, when I was 16, I got diagnosed with anxiety, tried a lot of different pharmaceuticals that were recommended by doctors. They didn't work. Ended up finding cannabis, got into that. This is at a time in Massachusetts where cannabis still wasn't legal. It was decriminalized, but it still wasn't legal. There was no immediate future in cannabis. So I went to school for psychology. Around that time, medical got legalized. I ended up working at a dispensary, and through that time my father got diagnosed with cancer, and I helped him through end of life with a lot of the same cannabis products that him and I grew together. And so around that time I got into the industry, like I said, and it was great at first, and then over time it just kind of fizzled out, and big corporations bought out the company I was working with, and I started to have a real big dark night of the soul. And so this brings us up to 2019. I've been in the personal development in every aspect, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, for as long as I can remember. And I had been huge into the Chek Institute, right? Paul Chek. So I ended up deciding, to fly out to California alone. This is when I was still working at the dispensary before I quit. and take HLC1, Holistic Lifestyle Coaching. Took that, really fell in love with it, and started to get the wheels turning. Like, I want to do my own thing. And there was a lot of energy brewing. I could feel it. So a couple months later, I go to MJ BizCon, which is the biggest cannabis convention in the world. And I figured I'm going to rehash my love for cannabis here. I'm going to meet some investors. We're going to open our own place. It's going to be beautiful, right? And went there and basically just found a lot of Chad and Brads, right? A lot of people who ran from cannabis most of their lives, didn't inhale in high school, and now they want to make money off cannabis, right? That type of energy. And so came back, another huge dark night of the soul. And I actually took a big break from cannabis for a few months. And we can get into that if you want to, but and the importance of taking those breaks. But during that time, I started having a lot of energy come on. I mean, I had been a daily user of cannabis for over 10 years, and I wasn't ingesting all day or anything. And I had figured out all these perfect stories as to why it was okay to do that for me, right? I know for someone listening, they might be going, "It's fine for me, just for me," right? But I started noticing that I was unconsciously numbing my emotions. And when I stopped interacting with cannabis for a little while, I started to understand how they moved a little better. And during this time, I started to just put my voice out on Facebook. I didn't even have Instagram back then. Again, this is 2019, so not that long ago. And I just started to pour from my heart, write topics on perspective, love, things like that, and just write. So, about 2 years before that, I had heard Mark England on a podcast, Positive Head podcast. And I remember my girlfriend and I were both in cultivation at that point, and we were running around the grow room, pruning and doing stuff to plants. And we both had headphones and listening to the same episode. And we'd see each other and be like, "Oh my God, did you hear this part? Yeah, that was amazing. Really cool." Talking about words and all this stuff. So I had long forgotten about that. When I made one of these posts in 2019, right before 2020 started, a girl hit me up and was like, "Hey, where did you learn about language like that?" And so I tagged Mark, right? I was like, "Oh, Mark England, he has a company called Procabulary." I didn't even know about Enlifted at that point. And this guy was kind of a celebrity to me, And so about 2 hours later, I open up my messenger and there's a voice message from him. And he's like, "Hey, we should hop on a call. I really like what you're writing." I'm like, "Oh my God." I get this huge download. I hop on a call with him, and I pretty much had $2,500 left in my name at that point. And he tells me the cost of the course, which is $2,500. And I get that same nervous, exciting feeling that I had known. I started over the last couple of years to be like, when I feel that, that's a yes. Like, that is what I quantify as a yes in my being. And it felt like a yes. So I signed up, spent the last of the money I had right before I knew I was going to be probably quitting this job too. And I remember I called my girlfriend and told her, and she was like, "Well, what did your heart say?" I'm like, "Oh my God, yes." She's like, "Well, then what are you even calling me for?" And so that's how I got into Enlifted. It fast tracked my development, and it went from, "Oh, I'd never be a coach. I just like this for myself," to, "All right, maybe I'll be a coach, but I'll never do a group coaching program," to now these days being like, "All right, I host 2 podcasts. I do a group coaching program. I have a one-on-one business. I work with Enlifted." I mean, so much came from that initial, introduction to Mark England.
It's funny, the voice note thing struck me because even we were introduced together via voice note from Mark England, and it's hysterical. I could just almost hear it. Ryan Sprague, Mark England here, abracadabra at the end of it, right? He just has this way,
Yes.
And even his intentional pauses when he's speaking, everything is done with such, intellectual. Everything behind his communication is so intentional. It's really, it is. Yeah. It's a work of art. It's like he's painting a picture with his words, it's really cool. So, one thing you mentioned, Ryan, was you suffered from anxiety, and I don't want to step on your toes here because it's something where in my life, my younger brother has experienced it as well on a really profound level, which impacted him. Through high school and college and beyond. So I was just curious about when did it start for you when you recognized that this was part of who you were and how you dealt with things? When was that spot in your life that you recognized anxiety was a big part?
Yeah, it was about sophomore year. I was right around 16, maybe still 15, but right around there. And I started noticing that things were just going really fast for me. Like, that's what it felt like. It felt like when I was showing up to school, all of a sudden I'd be like, all right, get out of the car extremely fast and like meet your friend group so that no one can talk to you that's not your friend group, right? When you're going to lunch, make sure you get there immediately and sit at the right table so that you're not having the chance of interacting with someone who you might not know what to say around. Things like that were the patterns I started noticing. And at that age, I didn't have the language to articulate it, but I went to my parents and I was like, listen, something is off here. And my mom had told me about her version of anxiety growing up. And so I started to draw some correlations and be like, maybe that's what I'm dealing with. The funny thing being that, and we can get into this farther if you guys want to, but the funny thing being that, anxiety is something that I imagine most people experience, right? It doesn't mean they have anxiety, but they experience anxiety, right? And one of the things I do in my work is help people separate themselves from the condition they've been labeled with, from the emotion they're feeling. So they're not sad, they're experiencing a feeling of sadness, or they're not anxious, they're experiencing a feeling of anxiety. Because once you separate it, you're essentially telling your being, hey, I remember that I'm not my identity. I'm actually pure awareness that is watching what's happening to me. And so we can get into that if you want to, but those are the symptoms I started feeling right off the bat.
And that I'm looking, like just with my experience when I had it, like it was, again, I feel like I've had it, I've, experienced anxiety. Now I got to change my language a little bit. For most of my life, just in different areas of it. And like you said, it was my identity, right? When I would always email teachers or talk to people and I would have to tell them like, I have anxiety. So everyone I was labeled as I have anxiety, and therefore it is a part of my identity. It's who I am. And like you were talking about before, you tried a bunch of pharmaceuticals, and same thing with me. Like I went into, different therapy, and they would just immediately try a drug. Oh, this one gives you sexual dysfunction, and this one gives you insomnia, and this one, well, that doesn't work. So I went through all these, and finally one didn't give me a negative response. And now I've been on it for, 15 years or something like that, and I tried to get off it, and that completely messed with my hormones, and I was all over the place, worse than I've ever been. So now it's trying to figure out, and what I was also going to say was with cannabis too, is I've used it before, but it gave me even more anxiety. But again, not in an intentional way, just to like, oh, I'm with friends, let's get like fucked up or something, and then I would feel awful, and then after that I was like, I can't do it anymore, but trying to figure out a way to wean off one and introduce the other is what I would like to figure out, along my journey. So I'm really glad you brought up cannabis giving you anxiety, right? And this is one of the main things I see, especially with men who come to me with problems around their cannabis relationship, or people that, like you, are looking to move into more holistic means. They've heard about cannabis, but they're new to it, right? And it is technically a psychedelic. So, it's a challenging thing to interact with in some way, shape, or form. And what I found is that with the whole giving you anxiety thing, cannabis acts as a mirror. And the biggest challenge with it is that most of the indigenous peoples that used cannabis were stamped out and their history was lost along with it, right? And then, of course, we moved more from right brain into left brain, which now science is only what's quantifiable, what's measurable, and it's omitted the whole qualitative aspect of science and also plant medicines, right? That's why when you have this, these spiritual experiences, there's still more than half the people look at you like, yeah, you were on drugs though, They look at you in this like judgmental way, right? Because they can't measure it, and so therefore it doesn't exist. But these same people, if you try to have them explain love to you or explain how many units of love they have from one person to the next, they'll be like, I can't measure that. And it's like, okay, but it still exists, right? So it's a double-edged sword of breaking people out of that paradigm, and also being able to break ourselves out of that paradigm, because we're in it too, to a certain degree. I imagine, I know I was. And so the biggest thing is realizing that whatever this anxiety is, it could be generational trauma, it could be yours, it could be from your upbringing, your mom, your dad, whatever. And it could be that your parents were great, but you just picked up patterns that you saw them do. And so one of the things about cannabis is that it acts as a mirror. So whatever is going on inside of you, typically your ego or your, any different aspect of your being will be able to protect you from that. When you interact with cannabis, it opens you up, because essentially what is meant to happen is to feel those feelings fully which yes is absolutely fucking terrifying in many times, but emotions can only last so long, right? Feelings can only last so long. Stories can go on for a lifetime, but the emotion itself is just meant to be felt. And typically within 10 minutes, you'll have a huge burp, a huge sigh, a cry, whatever, and it will be gone, right? For that time being. And then maybe something else will come up. And so it's essentially like your body going to the bathroom or your emotions going to the bathroom, and us, learning to tell it, no, you don't need to go. No, you don't need to go, for years. And then we end up receiving anxiety as a symptom of these emotions building up inside of us. And then cannabis, when we don't understand how to interact with it or what it is. And again, the research on it is very new. They don't even, again, this qualitative stuff is not being studied at all. We don't understand that, and then we interact with it non-intentionally, and all of a sudden, boom, we're at a party, we get tons of anxiety, we have a quote-unquote bad trip or the classic paranoid experience, and we chalk it up as cannabis doing it, and it had nothing to do with us, right? And then it ends up like this scary thing, right? And so that's what I'm looking to change, is that whole paradigm of like, hey, listen, there are some questions you should ask yourself before interacting with a plant medicine, any plant medicine, but especially cannabis. And if those things don't check out, maybe it's not the right time to interact with them until you're ready and prepared and just able-bodied to do that.
So think about this, Ryan, as a former, middle school principal, right? So part of our education was around the DARE program. And
yes,
when you would hear about drugs, it was such a taboo subject. So cannabis became, as synonymous with one of the worst things that you could ever experience. If a kid was caught having weed, that was a big deal. They could be, there was
be expelled.
Yeah, like absolutely. There was a whole litany of things that came along with it. So as we're going through this journey and building men, it's almost rewriting the script of stories that we've told ourselves. And for me, I would tell myself, going through high school, I had friends that smoked, and it just wasn't my thing. I tried it once or twice, and it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And then I went away from it for years and years and years. And to me, the story that I told myself was that I'll never do it. And I played, sports in high school and in college, and my friends would do it. I was like, that is not who I am. So I associated with it. There was such a negative connotation around any drug, it
was demonized.
It was
right?
absolutely demonized. So I'm wondering what should be the story that we're telling kids? I have kids that are 11, 13, and 16. If they're asking me about it, what's a story that I should be telling my kids about?
You have to combat it against the general population's idea of what this is, right? So you're going to tell them something, but their teacher and their principal and all these other authority figures are going to tell them something completely different.
And then they're going to see something on TikTok that's completely different as well. So,
so now you're,
So if you have an opportunity to go and talk to kids that are middle and high school, what's your message to them that I could then take and give to my own kids?
Yeah. So what I would tell them is the same way they wouldn't take ibuprofen for fun, and they understand that ibuprofen, to use the pharmaceutical analogy, is something that is powerful and can definitely hurt you more than it can help you if you don't understand how to use it. Cannabis is the exact same way. It's a tool. It's not the tool. It's not something that everyone has to interact with. But there are clear studies that show that really there is a certain time period where you really shouldn't be interacting with high amounts of THC. Now, then again, there are certain times where, say, if kids have cancer and things like that, there are certain like experiences or certain periods, I would say, where that can all go to the wind, and we can get into that if possible. But what I would tell most children is that this is a powerful medicine, and it's not meant to be disrespected and used unconsciously. And maybe I would use different language than unconsciously, but that it's a tool. It's a medicine, and just like penicillin or anything they understand from the doctor's office, it's not something that's a toy, and it can do harm. That's one of the things that I talk about a lot, because you'll hear in the industry that, hey, cannabis, you can't OD on it. You should just smoke it all day. It'll never hurt you. And that's only half true. Like, yes, physically, can you OD on it? No. Can you hurt yourself with it? I mean, maybe if you have bronchitis and you interact with it, you can hurt your lungs. I'm not exactly sure, but no immediate way, unless it's tampered with or had pesticides drawn in it. But no one talks about the psychological addictive part, right? This is where the addiction does come in. And I know because I've had it myself. I've worked with countless clients who have gotten out of it. And ultimately it was me. It wasn't anything the cannabis did, but it's me. And so how I would relay it to kids is just that it's a powerful medicine, and it should be used intentionally and consciously, and only when appropriate, you know. And that version of appropriate can change as someone gets older, but you know, especially if we're talking about young kids, I mean, really the only time that I would even consider like a positive scenario where a kid interacts with cannabis is like, God forbid, if a kid has cancer or epilepsy or something, where like actually cannabis is much less harmful than the pharmaceutical options available.
It's almost like taking it from criminalizing it and demonizing it. That's one part of their brain. That's the story they're telling, and then the other part is like, yeah, let's go smoke some fucking weed and get so fucked up. And
put it on
there's not a lot in between
pedestal.
there. From my experience, it was one or the other. So you were afraid of it because it was wrong and it was illegal, or you were a fucking pothead. You were just this fucking druggy kid that walked around the school. So that was my story. There was nothing in between. So what's the age then? What's the age where you would say, you know what, now it's appropriate for them?
Or is it based off of their psychological, like how they're actually dealing with? Because that's the way that I would look at it. I don't know when you would introduce it to them.
Yeah, you know, I'm really glad we're chatting about this, because this brings up a great subject, right? Which is, why are so many kids, especially like boys, looking to get fucked up around the ages of 12 to 14, right? That's really when it starts. I mean, you have some outlying cases of kids that are 10 or 11 or a little bit farther along, but right around that time, that's when I started getting really like excited about the idea of alcohol, really excited about the idea of cannabis, really excited about tobacco. And I started thinking about this, and I'm like, well, what is one of the main things that our societies are missing as opposed to the tribal societies of the past? It's rites of passage, right? Like, a lot of what these medicines have been used for millennia now are when a boy is about to become a man, right between 12 and 14, when puberty hits and all of these things start happening, and they would actually interact with a plant medicine, potentially ayahuasca, potentially peyote, potentially cannabis, tobacco. I mean, there's a myriad of different plant medicines out there. And so personally, you know, I'm conflicted on this a little bit, because you know, I understand what the science says. Also, science is wrong and changes all the time. But what I would say is, if you're looking to give your child or your boy, especially, a rite of passage, there might be an exception to this, although I don't go into that side of it. But I am willing to accept that there's something there that is worth exploring for someone who does the research. What I would say personally is, from the science I've seen, really around 18 to 21 is when I would start experimenting with cannabis. Probably closer to 18, to be honest, because let's be real, we live in an interesting world, and cannabis is becoming more and more popular now and more destigmatized. And at 18, your brain is developed enough where you're not going to be doing any harm. Now, even the harm that, you know, they talk about before you're 18 with being able to do with cannabis, there's a lot of conflicting research on it. And also, you know, unless you're interacting with cannabis daily, I do think there are definitely, like, say if you're 14 and you're interacting with cannabis daily, I imagine that 99.9% of the time you're not interacting with it in the way that's going to be beneficial to you. You're probably learning patterns to numb your emotions and hide everything you're feeling. And so, you know, that's why I would wait till 18, not necessarily because I'm worried personally about brain development and things like that, but because it's so easy to get yourself into patterns that when you're that age and your brain is still actually like forming, can become very deep roots. And, you know, I don't know if you guys have heard of Training Camp for the Soul. Well, yeah, you've interviewed Chris, and like, you know, that's what they deal with, a lot of those types of things. And so I am very fortunate that, you know, I tried cannabis for the first time when I was 14 and I did not like it. I hated it. Right. And so the next time I tried it was when I was 17, and I enjoyed it a little bit. Like, I would relax with it basically. It wasn't until I was around 19 that I really started getting into it. And by that time, I understood enough of what I was looking for, which was anxiety relief. And I understood, like, okay, if I use this in the morning, it does not help. When I got to go out into the world and go to school and do these things, it doesn't help. But it does help at the end of the day. And so I was able to move myself into, okay, exercise and these help at the beginning of the day, and then use cannabis at the end of the day. So, you know, as a vague answer, I would say around 18. You know, that's what worked for me. And again, like, everyone's going to be a little different, but I feel at 18 you have enough of a lease on life where you can at least start to have some awareness around whether or not something is an issue or it's actually helping you.
It's funny you mentioned Training Camp for the Soul. The episode that published today when we're recording this was Anat Perry, who it's
cool.
Anat and Chris. We had them on in like back to back. The other thing I found interesting was you saying rites of passage, and it's something that we're definitely really keyed into is the idea of rites of passage with young men, because there's not really in current society that doesn't exist anymore. You know, but you had mentioned back in the day what had happened with rites of passage. And it's funny, we had Mike Bledsoe on a while back, and we asked him about rites of passage. And basically he was like, I don't have any kids right now, but here's what I would do. We'd go on an ayahuasca journey together. Then we'd go out into the woods for a week. We'd kill a lion and chant and then do ayahuasca
and then
again.
do another ayahuasca. Yeah, I was like,
that was Bledsoe's interpretation.
That's why I love Mike so much.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
he was amazing.
Yeah, my God. I mean, but I'm also scared to death of that as well.
Yeah,
The other thing I wondered too, based on that, and I don't know if there's a specific answer to this, but it made me think about, when does society consider young men, especially, so we'll talk about men, when are they adults? You had mentioned 18. When do young men become adults? And I wonder if you ask kids that are like, my son's age, who's 16. If you ask kids that are 22, like, when, in your opinion, when does a boy become a man? Yeah, absolutely.
Ever, but.
God, it's really funny about this, and I'm gonna say it, which is like, I feel like a lot of men still haven't figured that out, right? A lot of them are still boys, right? So I think it's, what my heart is telling me to say here is that it's much less, like, as I'm seeing it now today, it's much less of an age thing, and it's much more of like a consciousness level thing, right? Because we have many elders, but not too many wise elders anymore, right? We can't, it's not typical for someone who's between 40 and 60 now to know how to work with the land and know how to skin an animal and these things. And I don't know how to do these things, so I'm not saying that I do by any means, but it's just, if you look at like this survival aspect, right? Like for me, what I would say, like, quantifiably, I believe right around 12 to 13 is when a boy is transitioning into being a man. Now, if you look at what society says, they say 18, right? But they don't really give any other context for it. They're just like, all right, when you're 18, yep, you're an adult. But it's like, it doesn't work like that. Yep. You don't just turn an age and all of a sudden, boom, you get a new level of consciousness, right? There has to be, some type of guidance to actually allow boys to become men, or we're going to end up with this quote unquote toxic masculinity, which actually doesn't exist. It's just immature masculinity, which we're seeing happen and we're seeing focused on. And, that's how I would put it. Personally, I feel between 12 and 13 is when a boy starts being able to become a man. But I also feel that many men aren't getting that these days. And that's why you're seeing so much of this, once again, toxic masculinity be everywhere, right? When it's really not, it's just being focused on. But it is out there for sure.
I think, too, kids in general are so much more capable than what we give them credit for. We don't allow them to experience things. We don't allow them to experience difficulties and hardships and failures. We solve problems for kids in a way where they're not able to experience what it's like to fall down. Because unless you fall down truly, if you don't deal with it at a certain point in your life, it's you'll fall down eventually. And if you don't develop those skills,
and when you're 27 years old and that's your first time falling down, then that's a lot different.
Then what do you do? And mom and dad,
That's
you're either going to go back to them, or you're going to be like, what do I do now? What's my strategy to solve this problem? I also wonder, Ryan, about you started mentioning that toxic masculinity. You do a lot of work with men, and you mentioned the Connect with Cannabis program, and I would love for you to talk to us a little bit about that. But as we spoke before we started recording, you had mentioned helping men get in touch with their emotions and their feminine side as well. So talk to us a little bit about how you operate in that space. What does that look like for you?
Yeah. So one of the things that was reflected back on me by many men that I met was like, wow, man, it's so amazing to be around you because you have such a comfortability, like residing in the feminine, right? Like I have no problem like pampering myself. I have no problem taking care of myself. I have no problem holding space. I have no problem, understanding when it's right to share my emotions. I have a very good relationship with my feminine, right? And I have a very good ability to connect with others. I mean, my girlfriend jokes she can't bring me literally anywhere if we have a time constraint, because I'll end up talking to someone and time goes out the window for me. I'm very in the present moment, which is another very feminine trait. And so, I started like meeting other men and who were much more in their masculine, right? And being like, oh, cool, and picking up from that. And then being like, that's the way. And then through a series of events, right, as life unfolded, I started realizing I came to this point where I'm like, all right, it's a balance that I need, right? And so I started noticing, yeah, a lot of men don't know, like a lot of these men who I would consider falling into quote unquote immature masculinity, it was really just a lack of feminine energy, right? It was an inability to take on other people's weight at times, right? Like say if their partner, especially their female partner, wanted to come home and just talk about her day. They were like, well, how do we fix it? How do we fix this? How do we do that? And they're so in their masculine that they don't understand that really what the feminine needs and what the masculine aspect of us needs is to be able to move into that feminine energy where we just sit there and go, yeah, that's very interesting. Wow, that must have been really hard. And we don't try to necessarily fix anything because nothing is inherently broken, right? And so that was like a big sign for me, in working with some men and realizing that, hey, there's something missing here. And then, of course, if you think about life as a movie, I started realizing, oh my goodness, actually during a plant medicine ceremony, I'm like, this is why I get along with cannabis so much, because cannabis is a feminine plant. And this is also why I've gotten into trouble with cannabis, the typical cannabis laziness thing, because cannabis is feminine. If you don't remember to be the masculine in it, whether you're a male or female, then you're just going to hang out and you're just going to chill because that's what it's meant to do, and it can be extremely beneficial in that way. But if you don't understand that and you're sitting on the couch and you don't understand that, yes, you're going to want to sit there even though you had a full plan ahead of you because it's feminine. If you're just like, wow, I wanted to do stuff, but now I just feel relaxed, like, yeah, then you're going to end up sitting there. So, it allowed me to realize that cannabis can be this medicine for men, especially, and for women too, of course, but I focus more on men's work, and it can be this beautiful medicine for men where they can get a mirror of how they're doing without their ego, their inner critic, anything filtering something out for them. They can just get an unapologetic look of like, hey, how well are you holding space? Hey, how well are you able to connect? How well are you able to connect with yourself, right? AKA anxiety, these things, whatever, that was where these two things started to collide. And just a few months back, I switched my main program, which was going to be a typical self-development program and, my own little ways around that, into a cannabis training program for men. And it's been very fun.
It's interesting you had mentioned men, the way that they're interacting when there's an issue, when there's a problem. I just experienced it myself over the past weekend where my partner, my girlfriend, there was something that, had come up with my ex-wife actually. And there was like this kind of, divide that had happened. And it was an awkward experience. And I was thinking about it. And as we're discussing it, what I was doing was trying to solve the problem. I saw she had mentioned this is how I felt during this experience. And I'm like, yeah, and I'm like trying to like put the Lego pieces together and build it up in a certain way and give it to her like, oh yeah, it's fixed right now. Yeah. And I was thinking about it from my perspective 100%. How did I feel during this? How did I feel? And this is how you fix it. And we had this whole long thing. Like, she's like, listen, I don't need you to fix this. I just want you to recognize, like, this was a sucky experience that we just went through together.
Let her feel it.
Let me feel this and just let me know that you had felt what I just told you. And I was like, holy shit, you're absolutely right. And so I had this whole moment where I was like, listen, like there's part of me that is like a bit of a Neanderthal in that way based on we have issues with how we were raised by our father and how there wasn't a whole lot of emotion and there was just, get from point A to point B as quickly as you can, be able to fix it and check it off. Where I told her, I said, listen, I would also get into this defensive spot a little bit. If I felt like I was being backed into a corner, there's that fight, flight, freeze response, and my mind were either freeze or fight. And I would freeze, and then I would fight whatever it was. And it was very combative in nature. And I finally was like, listen, I appreciate you allowing me to process this in a way. Like, I will get to the point. I definitely will. It might just take me a little bit longer until I'm fully able to say, okay, let me take a step back, understand what my thoughts are, then understand what the emotions were surrounding it. Now let me show up in a way where I can just hear what you're saying. This epiphany that I had the other night.
That was when I love that.
We were just sitting down on the,
talking.
Yeah, we were down at the sand pit in Delaware, and we just had a moment where, and it turned into like a 2-hour conversation. It was really, really powerful, and I was able to go through this journey and fully process it.
So is that why would you say all psychedelics are feminine, or because
Not-
they force you to go inward, or is it just cannabis in that sense?
So there's a couple different plants that are feminine in nature. The two biggest that come to mind are cannabis and ayahuasca. More masculine plants are like tobacco, peyote, wachuma, iboga, ibogaine. But yes, cannabis is very feminine,
Yeah.
and I'd love to chat more about that if you guys have any specific questions, because this is like, it's so obvious to me now, and that it's like really funny. Like it's honestly cute to watch my movie in the past and like how I fell into these patterns and thought it was cannabis, completely externalized my power, which is a very feminine thing. Like I externalized my power on other people. I asked other people for support, but I never put the power back in me. So it's funny, like, so through a backdoor means, cannabis actually helps men with their masculine too, right? It's just that it's a feminine plant, so it does it in a feminine way, but it can help in both ways, which is really cool.
See, I've like, this is just like opening up my eyes a little bit here, because I'm thinking when you said, like, it's not the cannabis that's doing this to me, right? It's bringing out something within myself that I had there, but it just opened up my eyes to it, right? So I think part of what I was doing when I was smoking before is that I was resisting, or I was the victim of cannabis, right?
Yes.
And it did this to me, and why would it do that to me? I can't do that. It's like, no, that was within me. And if I can let that wash over me and actually heal from it, that's when I can experience all the benefits that come from it. Because I'm sitting here and I'm like, God, every time I was like, that's bad, I can't do that. It did that to me. Like, even that language that I'm telling myself, that's exactly what I was doing all my life.
Yeah. Yeah. And, the other thing here too is there's actually two things. Number one is what the energy of the person who grew it is, which is a whole nother conversation, but that's something that no one is talking about. I mean, like, you think about a lot of the companies that are growing these plants right now, and I worked for one of them. Like, it's, again, people that ran from cannabis and didn't inhale in high school, and the plant is extremely sentient, right? Like, I mean, if you've ever read The Secret Life of Plants, we understand that plants are very conscious, right? And so if you think cannabis, which is the highest vibrating plant in the whole entire world, doesn't understand the energy of the person who comes into the room that's just worried about money, or just, really anxious, or not making enough money to make ends meet, and that energy is being uploaded into it, not to mention they're feeding it chemical salt nutrients, which are basically steroids, and they're putting it on the shelf under like bright lights, and it's just, all these different things no one's talking about. But at the very base of it, it's like these things are happening for us, and then the mission for us as men, right, especially, our mission is to figure out what it is, right? That's when we get to problem solve and we get to put that into action. But there's a time to feel it, right? When we're interacting with cannabis, for me, what I do is when I'm interacting with cannabis, I don't try to solve it, right? Because it's so easy to get myself caught into trying to solve the problem with the same level of thinking that created it, that when I'm interacting with cannabis, I'm meant to feel it, right? And it's uncomfortable sometimes. Sometimes it's amazing. Sometimes I'm blissed out, like unbelievably. But also other times it's challenging. And so I'll move through that, and then I'll maybe journal a couple of things. I'll breathe. I'll meditate sometimes if it gets really uncomfortable. I just kind of want to be on standby mode. And then afterwards, then I'll go with my masculine and actually start trying to put things together and problem solve it and, build the puzzle. And I find that being able to dance between my feminine and masculine allows both aspects to work at what they do best, instead of having my masculine do both or my feminine do both, when in reality that very rarely works.
So I'm thinking about, would you say it's better than to get yourself on a higher vibration by meditating daily, by journaling, by working on these things before going in and using cannabis, or go in, or have that part of the process with the whole thing? Or would you say start with something first?
Yeah, there's two ways to look at this, right? Some people are undoubtedly going to interact with cannabis before that, and it can actually help them get into spirituality. Other people are going to find spirituality completely sober and then find plant medicines later on. I think both sides are okay, but what I would say is that, I interacted with cannabis for the first couple of years that I did without having any type of spirituality in my life whatsoever. And the results I got were much more like just gray state, numbed emotions, tired a lot, things like that. When I started actually interacting with breath work, meditating, writing affirmations, journaling, creating manifestations, visualizing all these things, it
it was really like cannabis and I became a power couple. The conversation, like the feeling I felt from her was like, you're doing your work, I'll make sure to do mine, and now we have this dance in tandem that I can double down on my visualizations. I can manifest things quicker into my life. I can think farther outside of the box, and I can take myself less seriously. And that's a huge thing for men, is that so many men are taking themselves so seriously. And when you're taking yourself seriously, you have no more room up here, right? You have a million cars in the traffic jam because you're trying to figure out how you look, how you talk, how you feel, right? And when that's out there, that's essentially telling the universe that you don't have faith, right? And when you don't have faith, the intuitive downloads that come from your higher self have no room to come through. It's like sun trying to come through in a cloudy day. And so that's why I feel that having these spiritual practices and then involving plant medicines into that paradigm, first of all, it allows you to actually understand when these medicines are working for you and when you're just interacting with them to hide things. And it gives you awareness, which when we really talk about it, like the only goal I see in life is continued self-awareness, right? Because you're never going to get it perfect. You're going to continue, being messy, right? Sometimes get it wrong, sometimes get it right. But if you can continue to gain awareness around like, oh yeah, okay, I interacted with cannabis, let's say as an example for that night, and I went out and I did not like that. Like that was yikes for me, right? And then so you get out of that experience and you start to go, okay, well, what do I know about big crowds of people, especially like a sporting event? Well, I know that a lot of them are probably aggressive and on alcohol and, frustrated. And so I'm probably picking up a lot of those emotions. Yeah, I'm opening myself up with cannabis. And then what's coming in is all these like undesirable emotions. Okay, now I realize that, maybe that's not the best environment for me to interact with cannabis with. And then another time, maybe you interact with cannabis and you go to a yoga session. And you're like, wow, usually when I do a yoga session, I'm in my head for the first 30 minutes, and then I finally break through at the end. But when I interacted with cannabis, I was able to get in there and get right into my body and flow, and I got better results, and I didn't judge myself so hard through it. Okay, that seems like something, maybe there's a correlation there, right? And you're going to start to be your own scientist. That's what it is with plant medicines. A lot of the time it's hitting buttons and figuring out what happens and being aware. And sometimes it's, oh my God, that was amazing. Sometimes it was yikes. And then you just figure it out, and having that spiritual paradigm to go along with it helps so much. Because otherwise, I will go out on a limb by saying that if you don't do breath work and meditate and have a connection to source, God, whatever you want to call it, then you're more than likely going to end up in some pattern of unconscious use and using it too frequently, whether it's cannabis, whether it's tobacco, whether it's alcohol. I mean, whether it's anything, right? I don't believe inherently anything is bad or good. It's just how you interact with it, and having awareness around how you interact with it is the key to making sure that you're doing it in a way that serves you.
So going from, this backdrop of, dealing with the anxiety, working in that industry for a period of time, and then, coming to this epiphany where you're like, let me reestablish my relationship with cannabis based on my father's experience. And so you had mentioned that was a big part of it. So how did you get from, that point to where you decided I wanted to start a podcast called Oddly Optimized? Talk to us a little bit about that journey from, where you reintroduced yourself to cannabis in a way where it wasn't necessarily like I want to go and get high, or it's a criminalized thing, to where you start a podcast where, not that it's about that in your podcast, but you're using it as a backdrop to get in touch with a different side of yourself.
Yeah, that's a great question. Really what happened was, like I said, I mean, I was at a certain point in the industry where things just weren't like, I was learning more and more. I was listening to more and more spiritual teachers. I was learning a lot more about cannabis as a spiritual medicine. And, I would use one bowl at the end of the night when I got home from work after like a 12-hour day. And, so I could easily tell myself the story that, hey, Ryan, you're using this responsibly. You're not overindulging. You go the whole day without it, and then you come home and it helps you relax and sleep and all these things. And I did fall into that story for a long time. And, I failed to realize how much that daily connection was actually hindering me at that point, because what I didn't realize at that point was that if you don't have a direction for your cannabis experience, like especially if you're running away from something, if your intention, whether conscious or unconscious, is to run away from something, what's going to end up happening is cannabis, as the feminine, will act as an overprotective mother and will hide you from everything. And then what will happen is over time, you'll find that you need cannabis before everything. Oh, I'm going to go take a walk. Better get high first. Oh, I'm going to have food. Better get high first. Oh, I'm going to have sex. We better smoke a bowl first. Like it starts involving into everything because it becomes your safety. Right. And so I started realizing this. I had this big aha moment when I was in Las Vegas. It's actually a really funny story with some other plant medicines included. And after that MJ BizCon, we ended up going out to a party and interacted with some plant medicines. And, you know, after that party, we left at like 7:30 in the morning. And my girlfriend at the time was writing an application for a big Illinois company for a cannabis license. And she wanted to get on the plane. She wanted to get some sleep, and we didn't get any sleep. And I was tasked with the time thing, and I'm not the best with time, let's just say. So it was my fault, right? And I owned up to it. It was the first time in a while that I had been like, this is totally my bad, like 100%. And when I did that, something really unlocked in me where all of a sudden I realized, oh my goodness, I'm feeling sadness. And then I was like, wait a minute, I haven't felt this in fucking years, right? Since my dad passed away. And then I got this very strong message from what I now know is my soul that was like, Ryan, you need to take a break from everything for a while. You need to subtract from your life, not add anything back in. So around that time, I stopped. I mean, really, cannabis was the only thing I was interacting with. So I stopped interacting with cannabis. I already didn't, interact with caffeine daily or alcohol. Never, I just never really liked it. So that was really the only thing. Over that time, I got these huge downloads and just intuitive knowings. And I gained the confidence at that time. Basically, I strapped back into my masculine is what happened. And I started being like, I'm not just going to plan things. I'm going to actually do them. Right. And that's the stereotypical, like archetype of the stoner, right? They plan a lot, but they don't do anything. Well, that actually does happen sometimes, And so, my girlfriend and a bunch of people have been telling me for a long time, you should start a podcast. You should start a podcast. And I was like, everyone's doing it. I don't want to do it. And then I realized, well, yeah, but I want to do it. Like for me, I want to do it. And so I remember we were sitting in a Stop and Shop parking lot, my girlfriend and I was trying to come up with a funny play on words because at this point I wanted to do something with cannabis, which is funny because that's what I'm doing now. But I originally wanted to do like some type of cannabis something, some type of cannabis course, whatever. So we're talking about names, and I suck at coming up with names. She comes up with highly optimized. I'm like, that's amazing. I was born in the Stop and Shop parking lot, and then I started the podcast first, and I knew I wanted to do some type of coaching at that point, and that's like literally right around when I got into Enlifted. Like I'd say within 2 weeks of starting the podcast, I got into Enlifted, and then everything snowballed from there. So that's really how Highly Optimized was born. Yeah.
So just to segue into the podcast too, I'm interested as we are doing this podcast and learning on the journey. Initially, it was me doing like a solo podcast for a period of time, and then Anthony and I would do it together. And now we do it together, and we have guests on as well. I'm always curious, like how people go about the process. So for you, going through, when did you start the podcast? You mentioned, was it 2020?
It was actually, I believe it was December of 2019.
Okay.
Yeah, December of 2019.
So what have you learned about yourself in that journey in almost 2 years doing this podcast? What have been your big takeaways?
Oh, wow. That's a really good question because it allows me to reflect on my wins. And one of the biggest things I tell every guy, especially, is celebrate your damn wins, right? And, it showed me that like I do have what it takes. I can make myself proud. I can follow through what I say. I am meant to do these things. Like, I mean, for so long, I knew I was destined for something that was great for me, regardless of how much income or whatever, something that made me have a why, right? And I knew I was picking up pieces with fitness and, holistic health, but I knew also that there was something big missing. And really what it was faith in myself. And so if it's one thing that I learned, it's that I can depend on me. I have faith in myself now. And, we were talking about before we hit record, how many amazing guests I've got to have on. And not just that, like, I started having these guests on in 2020 when the world was, kind of shut down. And then I also decided to travel more than ever in 2020. I just like to kind of do the opposite of what the mainstream is saying. So I ended up meeting a lot of these people in person. And now no joke, how many episodes have I done? About 66 now or something. I've met almost every single one of those people in person, shared experiences with them, gone on adventures. I mean, it's literally mind blowing to me how much, like, if this was measured in dollar amounts, I mean, the value I have for this is like trillions of dollars. Like, I mean, the amount of connections, the amount of people that help me feel not crazy in a world that is not really like worried about the things that a lot of us that are into holistic health and spirituality are worried about, right? So it's not their fault by any means, but it was like I was starting to feel like, am I alone here? Like, is there anyone that's going to feel like me? And the universe answered with like, oh, you want one person? How about I give you hundreds? And so, yeah, it was amazing.
Yep. So what would you say is what's next for you with either the Highly Optimized podcast, with this One Time On Psychedelics, the Connect with Cannabis program? Take us on the journey of Ryan Sprague over the next year of your life. What's in store?
Yeah, in the next year. So we just started Connect with Cannabis. The second group is starting September 22nd. That's been going great. So really diving full into that. We have 2 other levels to that we're creating. My expertise in the cannabis industry is cultivation and soil science and doing organic regenerative agriculture. That's like my other passion that we didn't even get into, but it's, growing your own food and all these things. So the next course I'm going to be creating this year is a grow course based on growing cannabis spiritually with biogeometry, how to maximize the potential yield and quality with the energy in the room. So involving some of the classic woo-woo into the cannabis space, and having done it myself, the quantifiable measures such as yield and potency are much higher. And also the effect of like how powerful the medicine is much more prominent too. And by powerful, I don't necessarily mean strong. I mean, like, I got what I was looking for out of it, And so I'm really excited about that. Going full steam ahead on podcasts. I have both those podcasts release an episode every week. So I'm podcasting pretty much constantly. And then really after that, we're looking at creating some cannabis courses, like specifically how to have better sex with cannabis, how to be an expert in a dispensary setting, because so many people, especially 50 to 60, are getting out there and they have no idea what's going on. They walk into a dispensary for the first time, there's rap music playing, they see green crack and Alaskan thunderfuck on the menu, and they're like, what the hell is all this, right? And so, helping those people out, and also helping the other side out, which is more my passion, which is like, how do you use cannabis to connect deeper? I mean, we don't have a loneliness epidemic. We have a lack of connection epidemic, right? I like to reverse that. And so really what I see with my whole mission, my whole why, and what Connect with Cannabis and all the future levels and my whole business is about is helping people learn to connect deeper. And the way that I do that is through the power of cannabis, So for those interested in cannabis and looking to connect deeper, I mean, you'll know if you're someone who's interested in it. If you are, reach out. I mean, these are the people that I love working with. And, I work with many other people who aren't necessarily in my cannabis programs. I do one-on-one stuff too, but I like to stay busy, So that's my next year at a glance.
Totally appreciate you clarifying all that for us. Our mother deals with insomnia. She's, she
has anxiety. She has insomnia.
So she's, she has a card to go and, purchase marijuana to help her to purchase cannabis to help her sleep. So when she told us sons, I'm going for some Alaskan thunderfuck, we're like, Mom, what the fuck? Mom, are you kidding me? We're like, why do you have to go all the way to Alaska for a thunderfuck? Why? Is there not? There's no.
They have one more locally.
My God, but why do you need that thunderfuck? First of all, so thank you for clarifying that.
We were worried.
Good. It's a big challenge, And one of the things that most people don't understand is that, like, you don't necessarily have to interact with THC, aka the intoxicant component of cannabis, to get the benefits. I mean, there are so many amazing things that hemp has made available now. And so you still get the psychoactivity, which is the ability to help your psyche, the ability to help your physical body without the intoxicating effects that bring on anxiety, paranoia, and bring the things that are already in you to the surface. So you can take stepping stones. And that's what I always suggest for people is start with hemp. There's no reason you need to get an intoxicating effect from it unless that's what your soul is calling for. So do some, discernment, or use some discernment in that for anyone listening.
So before we finish up here, Ryan, if I'm a listener to the Building Men podcast or the Building Men podcast, who is your target? Like who should be reaching out to you? Like what questions do they have? Like what type of person are you looking for that would be the best fit for your program?
So right now we are going to be beta testing a women's group in December to January. So right now, what I would say is I'm looking for high achieving men that feel as though they need to give up cannabis for one reason or another. And I say that because of how many high achieving entrepreneurs out there are using way too much cannabis and they know it, but they just don't know how to break the cycle. And they're starting to wonder, do I have to quit this forever? Right? Those are the people I'm looking for because they're already motivated. They're already usually into some type of physical, emotional, mental, spiritual well-being. And it's just literally a small pattern interrupt to be like, hey, just make an intention before the next time you interact with cannabis and you'll actually get what you're looking for. And then you won't feel a need to interact with cannabis so soon after because you're like, oh, I'm complete. I'm not running from any feeling. I feel great. I don't need it. Right. And so that's what I'm looking for is high achievers that have a good relationship with cannabis, but are starting to get to that level where they're like, there's something missing here.
Yep. And so how can the Building Men audience find you? How can we reach out to you and connect with you?
Yeah, so the business Instagram is at highly.optimized. I'm on there. My business partner, Alex Morningstar, is on there too. But if you want to talk to me straight up, I'm at the real Ryan Sprague, and my last name is Sprague. I share the podcast on there. I do that. I'm also starting a clubhouse room on the 16th, which I believe is a Monday, if I got the date right, called the Philosoph Hour. What I've been noticing is that, one of the things that cannabis specifically was used for, and fine wines and all of these things by philosophers of the past, would be they would, sit around, they would indulge in some great biodynamic, to use that term, herbs or wines or things, and they would pick a subject and they would just riff on it for an extended amount of time. So that's what the Philosoph Hour is. It's come in your highest vibe state, whatever that takes, whether it's interacting with cannabis, whether it's right after a yoga class, whatever. And we're just going to pick a subject and go off the cuff. And so that's my newest thing I'm starting, and you can find me there as well.
Awesome. Anthony, any final thoughts, questions, comments?
No, this was eye-opening. This was great. I learned a lot. That was a good,
Thank you guys.
good lesson for us, I think. So I'm ready to get some cannabis. I don't know about you, brother.
I'm going with the Thunderfuck.
Absolutely.
Of course.
I don't know if we want to start there or not. I don't know if that's like the best place to start. So I wanted to take the opportunity to thank Ryan Sprague for joining us today. Definitely visit his site. We will put all the information in the show notes, the Highly Optimized Podcast, this One Time On Psychedelics. And then if you're interested, the Connect with Cannabis program, definitely spelled out who he's speaking to. And for those of you out there that are interested, he's been very responsive. So definitely reach out to Ryan in that capacity. For the Building Men audience, you could find us on Instagram, building.men. Email address is buildingmencoach@gmail.com. Check us out on the YouTube. It's cool watching it on YouTube because you can see all the stupid stuff that we're doing behind the scenes as well. And go a step further than you thought you could go today. We will see you next time on Building Men.